Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jeannie Allen.
I love that. Voice of God. I asked for that personally. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you tonight? You all in the back having a great time and talking. You're going to want to sit down because this is a fantastic forum. Again, I'm Jeannie Allen. I am proud to be the founder and CEO of the Center for Education Reform and a partner and a good friend of Jimmy Kemp and the Kemp Foundation. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Please. I'm going to take just a couple of minutes and set the stage for why we're here before I hand it over to our fantastic speakers tonight. So again, welcome. It's hard to believe, but 25 years ago, school choice was born in America. And it wasn't just about education, it was about opportunity. And the opportunity for children to have a better future no longer determined by their zip code. You've heard that today. You hear it throughout America. It's a theme that ALEC members are proud to repeat. Many of you are proud to be leading. Since 1993, the Center for Education Reform has aggressively been fighting on behalf of students, families, and communities to exactly get those kinds of opportunities in education, and very much along with ALEC members. In fact, it is ALEC leadership working hand in hand, which some of what you'll see tonight and through this meeting, who've created some of the best, most enduring state laws governing school choice in America. From 43 plus the District of Columbia charter school laws to 28 laws governing the creation of tax credits, vouchers, and other opportunities, to, by the way, creating the best state-based standards that led to high-stakes tests that finally showed us, before the federal government ever got involved, how schooling was being done. By the way, not so much, even in some of our better suburban areas. ALEC members have been leading the way, and I was so proud and pleased when both Lisa Nelson and now my dear friend Leah Vukmir took back over and CER stepped up to the plate to support you all, because we know we can help make great things happen together. So thank you, Lisa. And Leah, again, who you'll be hearing from. So despite those 25 years and all those laws, here's the bad news. We still have fewer than 10% of children in America who have anything but the door and the school down the street from where their kids are zoned. That's not acceptable. And meanwhile, we're the most technologically advanced country in the world. We pick up our phones, we transfer information in moments' notices, we can grab a cab and Uber, we can find out where we're eating before we even leave this room, and yet we can't bring innovation and opportunity to our kids. Now, innovation can be a pencil and how you use it, or innovation can be teaching and learning. But when you don't provide the basis for flexibility, whether it be through public charter schools, schools of choice, or traditional school districts, then those innovations will never happen. And so I'm just going to spend 30 seconds more on my soapbox while I have you here as a proud sponsor of ALEC to tell you that we need your help. And you may be in states where your schools are great. But even Indiana, which we rank #1 on our parent-payer index, that provides more opportunity than most other states, thank you, even Indiana is about a 72%. Now, the last I looked on a 100% scale, 72% was kind of a C. So if the best state in the nation is a 72%, if the United States is still 36 out of all those industrialized countries in reading and math, if our best kids, and their biggest claim to fame is they think they're doing better than everyone else, but it turns out they're not, so they're high on confidence but pretty low on skills, we have an issue. So when we come to Iowa or Kentucky or Michigan or Washington State, along with tons of partners from the Friedman Foundation all the way down the line, and work with you, and you guys tell us, we don't have that issue here. Wrong. You do have that issue. And education is the key to expanding opportunity in America and creating upward mobility for our children. So that's why the Center for Education Reform is putting the I and the O back in education. Innovation and opportunity equals results. Innovations to be able to provide for all the entrepreneurs and innovative parents, educators, administrators, civic leaders, policymakers to figure out how to do this right. Quickly, iterate, test, take the risks, move to the next stage. Let's take a page out of American business, right? And opportunity so you all can decide. You all can decide as parents and communities and policymakers if it works for your kids and our kids. So without innovation opportunity, if that's not the hallmark out of every bill you write, sponsor, and pass, get over it, move on, and figure the next way out. There are tons of us waiting out there to help you. So to that end, I promise I won't bully you if you invite us to your state. So to that end, we were so excited when Jimmy Kemp, the amazing president of the Jack Kemp Foundation, agreed to be our partner in helping sponsor a series of expanding opportunity events across the country. We started in North Carolina with Governor Pat McCrory. Congressman Luke Messer joined us. The point of the Kemp Forum for education opportunity was to create an unprecedented conversation, a conversation that hasn't happened since I first started coming to ALEC, between federal, state, and local people. We're all talking about similar things, but we rarely all get in the room and have that conversation that says, how do we do this? So Luke Messer was our partner in North Carolina. And then we went to Indiana and we invited Governor Mike Pence, and he's an awesome old friend, and he said, absolutely. And Senator Tim Scott agreed to join us, and then he went off and took another job. But that's okay. It's a great job. And we're so glad he's out there. And the really, really good news is that with or without him, we have a phenomenal forum. So before we turn to that, I want to invite up Jimmy Kemp to say a few words about his work, and then we'll go back to the program. Thanks, Jimmy.
Before this event, I invited Jeannie. I said, Jeannie, I really think you should come out of your shell when you get up in front of everybody. And it's as you can see, it's a challenge for her. We're thrilled to be partnering with the Center for Education Reform. I'm president of the Jack Kemp Foundation. My father was a congressman from Buffalo, New York, and prior to that, he played for the Buffalo Bills. And our mission is to develop, engage, and recognize exceptional leaders who champion the American idea. And at its root, the American idea is the human idea. The idea that it doesn't matter into what condition you were born, that condition shouldn't determine the outcome of your life. And education is at the center of it. Our Kemp Forum programs are designed to engage exceptional leaders who champion the American idea. And I'm thrilled to have Senator Scott moderating these panels tonight. Senator Scott asked us to help him pull together a bunch of young people from Washington, D.C., from east of the Anacostia in southeast D.C. And he wanted to just have a conversation with them. 32 young people from D.C. came, and 15 of them came early. This was about 2 weeks ago. And I had the opportunity to talk to 15 of them because they weren't really prepared for what they were about to experience. And I asked them if they knew where they were. These kids go to Anacostia High School and Cardozo Public High School in D.C. And they did not know they were in the United States Congress. They didn't know the difference between the Senate and the House of Representatives. They thought we were in the D.C. government building. That tells you right there, the state of education is not equal. And one of the critical components to having the impact that you all are in public service for is to make sure that in order for anybody to care about what you know, they have to know how much you care. And Senator Scott cares. Not only did he invite these young people to his Senate office building for a conversation, but his staff called me the next day and said, okay, August 19th, that's when I'm going into Anacostia to meet with them in their neighborhood. I brought them to my neighborhood, but I'm going there. Senator Scott cares, you all care, and it's a real privilege to be here with you all to establish how much you care and also how much we know about how to get education on a path that will provide the maximum opportunity for all of our incredibly talented young people who have so much possibility inside of them. So thanks for letting us be a part of it. Jeannie, thank you for putting this on and for your great leadership, and I hope you all enjoy the night.
Thank you, Jimmy. We'll hear from him in a little while. His father's legacy, Jack Kemp, lives with so many of us. He inspired so many of us to do great things, so thank you so much for being part of it. Okay, I'm going to start by introducing our panel, starting with State Representative Tim Kelly from the state of Michigan. Tim was Education Policy Advisor to Governor John Engler, which is where I first met him and helped Governor Engler usher in one of the strongest charter school laws in the country, equalize funding so that there wouldn't be huge battles, create some amazing standards, and he went on to run and win in the 94th District in Michigan House of Representatives. So welcome, Tim. Thank you. Tim's got war stories coming out of Detroit, too. I hope they'll get into sharing. It's really tragic what's happening there, and political will is really lacking, and we're hoping that he's going to fix that before he leaves. Next, it's my pleasure to welcome up someone who's no stranger in anyone, State Senator Leah Vukmir, an ALEC National Chair, Assistant Majority Leader for the Wisconsin State Senate, representing the 5th District. And of course, as you know, Leah's spent her entire career pursuing great opportunities for kids and families. So thank you so much for Leah being here. And last but not least, Senator Tim Scott, it is such a privilege to have you here with us today. While he needs no introduction, of course, many of you know he was first elected to Congress in 1995, a member of the House of Representatives, now the U.S. Senate, and truly a leader to whom all of us look. So thank you so much, and please, thank you.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. How's the ALEC family doing out there? I heard this side. I know there's a dividing line between the two, but how's this side of the ALEC family doing? Excellent. Well, we'll get started on this panel on education. I will tell you that my best friend in Congress is an obscure congressman named Trey Gowdy from South Carolina. And Trey says that education is the closest thing to magic in America. Quality education is. Tell me how both of you got involved in the education movement, and what have you seen that works in your states, and what would you like the federal government to do less of?
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate all your great work, and it's an incredible honor to be here, and I want to thank the Center for Education Reform for giving us this opportunity and for being a strong partner with the American Legislative Exchange Council. For me, it's a very simple story, and Jeannie and I go way back. I really asked one very fateful question in my daughter's 4-year-old kindergarten classroom. She's 28 years old, so you can do the math. And the question was, can you show me the research to support this reading program that's not working for my daughter and, quite frankly, the entire class? I thought it was a rather simple question. I'm a mom, I'm a nurse, concerned about my daughter. And for asking that question, I was sent to the principal's office for daring to ask that question. From there, I was sent to the superintendent's office, and the next thing I knew, I was going to school board meetings and writing letters to the editor. And that's really what started my pursuit of understanding education, wanting greater options and choices for parents. It just so happened that that was the time that the landmark school choice program was beginning in the city of Milwaukee, which is my hometown. So it's very easy to see how I got pulled into the movement, and have been very proud to have been a part of it as an activist mom, but then also to have this lead me to run for elected office. And that's really how it started for me.
Awesome. Representative?
In the early 90s, I'm working in the Indiana Department of Commerce, selling Indiana as a business location, not only for expansions, but for new businesses. And oddly enough, my interest in this came through Japanese transplants. We were, at the time, getting a lot of Japanese companies coming over here, building primarily auto-related parts plants in and around Indiana. And they were deeply concerned about the lack of education that many of their employees were coming to them with. And so it became something of concern. That time, there was The Nation at Risk came out. Goals 2000 started by George 41. And so all this, there was a big attention. I worked for a few years doing that. I eventually found myself in Governor John Engler's office in Michigan. He hired me as his education policy advisor, and I'll tell you in his interview, I don't come with any academic background. I'm not, my family used to be in the asphalt business, so I don't have any credentials. He asked me what I thought of public schools, and I said, I think they suck. And it was basically, you're hired. If you know John Engler, he was iconoclast in the sense of trying to go after things, and he bred into me just a rabid dislike for the status quo and anything that would free kids up to be better prepared for the world we were going to do. So we've done an awful lot in Michigan, and we'll continue to do so.
Awesome. Thank you both. Let's talk for a few minutes about what plagues public education and what we can do to fix it. I thought it was interesting that, Tim, you're talking about workforce readiness. And when we think about what's coming our way by the year 2020, we'll have 3 million openings for skilled laborers, 5 million in the STEM world. So it appears to me that part of what plagues us, we haven't figured out the answer to, especially when we have 5.8 million vacancies in America today. You talked about what I think is the equilibrium. Programs that are effective for students, that have measurable progress in reasonable time, and asking an audacious question, like, what is it? And it doesn't work. Took you on a long, long journey. What plagues us, and how do we fix it?
Complacency.
Complacency.
I think largely. I think that, we need to do the thing. We're so worried about process. So much of the education community is built on process and not outcomes. It's inputs, not results. How many, it's about class size, it's about dollars, it's about, and we've done things to address all these things. I can tell you in Michigan, funding is going like this while performance is going like this. We're putting more money into education. We've got less students than we've ever had. And yet we're bringing up the rear in education nationally on a lot of different things. So what is this? And it's we've been saying for a long time, you used to be able to come right out of high school, and if you were beefy and brawny enough, you had a job in the auto plant. Well, now those jobs, it takes brains, not brawn anymore, and you have to be able to compute. You have to be able to communicate with one another. You have to be able to read well. And I think that largely we're raising a nation of illiterates. Look in any large city, and it's absolutely dismal. We have Detroit in my state of Michigan, ninth proficiency, 9% proficiency, 9% in reading and math. I mean, why they shouldn't even be open to be able to do that. I mean, it's an aberration. Their license should be pulled. I mean, it's absolutely it's horrible.
Well, we have a similar situation with the city of Milwaukee with terrible test scores as well, and I call it educational malpractice. And it's just a shame that the teachers union and the educational bureaucracy has allowed the status quo to continue, and they so fear competition, and that's truly what we need is competition. One of the most revealing things that happened when our Milwaukee Parental Choice program got off the ground that was very shocking is one day I opened up our local newspaper and saw a full-page ad for one of the public high schools in the Milwaukee public school system. The first time I ever saw an ad. So our Milwaukee Parental Choice program caused the Milwaukee public schools to suddenly realize we are in the business of competition, and now we have to attract parents as well. And it has made a difference. It continues to, we're beset with problems because people don't like to see the continuation of the program, and they're trying to regulate it and over-regulate it as a way of killing it. But competition is the key. And we all know that. And that's one of the great principles that we in ALEC support and put forward. So we've got a long way to go, but competition is the key.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, because as we think about what plagues our schools around the country, the reality of it is, what I heard from both of y'all, is that the more money you spend does not necessarily correlate with better outcomes. I know in South Carolina, in Fairfield County, one of the counties in South Carolina, we could spend about $17,000 per student and get worse results than we do in Greenville County, where you're spending around $9,700 per student. So when we're thinking about solutions and the way forward, if you were to look in your states and in your heart where you have passion, what's the solution that you're talking about the most, Chairwoman? And Representative, share with us where we're heading in Michigan.
Well, I think the solution, first of all, we were one of the first to have a charter school law back in 1994. We've currently got about 10,000 students, or 100,000. They've now consumed about $1 billion worth of our funds. We're a $14 billion K-12 education budget in Michigan. Charters get about $1 billion of that now. So it's serious business. And it's attention that the ed community certainly takes notice of, and is trying to do everything they can. Luckily, we have Republican majority in the House and Senate, Republican governor, so we stave off any kinds of nonsense about trying to control charter schools. But it's about freedom. We've got the most prohibitive Blaine language in the country, as prohibits public dollars going for private use. However, we've done some things over the years that kind of blur those lines. I'm happy to say in this last budget, and I chair K-12 education and PROPS in Michigan, in the House, and for the first time in history, we put a $2.5 million appropriation in for non-public schools. Now, this money is not for instruction. It's to basically pay for what we would consider mandated costs, fire drills, attendance, things that quite frankly, they would do without this. But it's a way of opening up the discussion because I think that we need to take this further. I think money needs to be, we already basically have a public school voucher now. They can take their money to a local public school, a local public charter school. We need to expand that to private and parochial schools.
Excellent.
Well, you're absolutely right, Senator, when you say that more money doesn't mean better education, because what we have seen in our program in the state of Wisconsin is that with fewer dollars, our children in our private school choice program are having better outcomes than their counterparts in the public schools. And so the key for us in Wisconsin is that we have continued to expand on our original program that started in the city of Milwaukee. We went to another community in Racine, and just this past session, we went to a statewide program. Again, we're incrementally increasing the number of children that can be a part of the program, but if I were to, wave my magic wand, I would just say, let's open the floodgates wide open, let the money follow the children, and let parents make the choices for their children. I mean, we all know the hashtag I trust parents. I trust parents. As a pediatric nurse practitioner my entire career, I worked in the inner city of Milwaukee. And I know that parents want the best for their kids, and I trust them to make those decisions. And I think that unfortunately too many in the education establishment make excuses for our children, especially our disadvantaged children, and think that they're not capable of getting out of the desperate situation that they're in, and they don't give them the opportunity to rise to that level. And I think that it's doing our children a disservice. You only have one shot at your K through 12 education, and we've got to make it as good as possible. And so beyond the public school choice, we've done, the private school choice program, we have expanded our charter schools in Wisconsin. More authorities are allowed to create charter schools. And then just this past session, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we passed a special needs voucher program in the state of Wisconsin, which is something that's very near and dear to my heart as I watched the McKay Scholarship Program in Florida, and I wanted desperately to give families of children with special needs the same opportunity.
We'll spend a little more time in a minute on special needs, but let's continue.
Senator, I just wanted to follow up with that, and I think I introduced bill to amend our Constitution because of our plain language to allow. I thought it'd be a good way, at least to start the discussion, would be through special needs. So I wanted to follow up on the McKay Scholarship. And I would happy to say it's out of the Education Committee. I don't know if Amanda Price is here, chair of our Education Policy Committee in Michigan. Anyway, I sit on that committee as well, but she took up a hearing and we passed it out of committee. I don't think it's going to do well on the floor. You got to have 2/3 majority to amend the Constitution. But anyway, we're trying to do what we can. We've just got this damnable language in our state constitution that we need to deal with.
We certainly, on the federal level, I've sponsored legislation called the Choice Act that includes making the $11 billion or so, the IDEA money for special needs kids, portable.
Yeah.
Giving the states the opportunity to do so if they decide to do so. On a funding perspective or funding conversation around charter schools, I know that in South Carolina, charter schools receive less money than your average public school, but they oftentimes have very strong results. Same would be true with any type of a voucher program, significantly fewer dollars. And perhaps the best example I have of the success of choice is the DC Opportunity Scholarship, where the average student in DC costs about $20,000 per student, with a graduation rate around 54%. And the Opportunity Scholarship costs around $8,500, with a graduation rate around 93%. So for less than half the money, you get twice the results, and yet it's being challenged all over the place. Do you see the same type of disparity in funding in both your states?
Absolutely, but even though there's that disparity, we're seeing the greater success rate in those kids. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do more is to tout those results. And we oftentimes hear, you're taking money away from public schools and making it difficult. Well, we're taking money away, but we're giving them less money, and they seem to be doing better with it. So it's very, very frustrating that we hit against that wall, and instead of touting and allowing the success of these children to be realized, we've got the naysayers who are saying you're just destroying public education. And not every child is going to make it in a public school. Every child is different. We have to look at the fact that maybe a brick and mortar school isn't going to work for one child, and a virtual charter school will work for that child. So again, Howard Fuller, who is a champion of school choice from the city of Milwaukee, often used this phrase, and it's so right. He said, we have to stop thinking about educating children in school systems, but instead think about educating children in a system of schools, because every child has a different need, and maybe that need is met in a public, a private, a virtual, or in a homeschool. Let's not forget homeschooling as well.
We clearly have a lot of the same arguments going on. It's interesting how, for where we come from funding, a thing called, in 1994 we did Proposal A, which kind of swapped local school funding for state funding. And where we came up with a foundation allowance, and that's piggybacked on every kid. Now, to the higher spending districts, it was kind of an amalgam. If you were a higher spending district, you were kind of held harmless. You get a little bit of that, and we make up for it. But so in the last 20 years, we try and make up the difference. So we bring the bottom up, and we call it a 2X formula every time we have some extra money to throw into education, which we have for the last 6 years in a row. You'll never hear that from the Democrats, by the way, but nonetheless, the charter schools are getting the max amount every time. Like this year it was 60 and 120. 60 the top, 120 the bottom. Because charter schools don't get local millage money, they don't get the local property tax money, they're already at somewhat of a disadvantage. So we're making that up as we fund the foundation allowance.
Have either one of you been a part of anything that you would consider cutting edge and innovative in the space of education that we could share with the audience that they might want to replicate in their states?
Well, you just mentioned, again, we're trying to push the envelope annually, as long as I've been in a position to where I can. In Michigan, last year tried to do the public school, non-public school funding. It was stripped out by my own party, by my own caucus. I told them, you can do it. I'm going to keep coming back till we get this. This year, the Catholic Conference of Non-Public Schools did their work, their homework, got the Senate involved, got the governor on board. So when I introduced it at $1 million, the Senate upped the ante at $5 million. We conferenced at 2.5. It was never about the amount of money. It was the line item. It was the intent. Now that we have a line item, by the way, the governor just recently asked for a Supreme Court opinion before the budget kicks in, and we're going to have that little battle because the education community, including the ACLU, are fighting tooth and nail against what they see as a further abrogation of their money, their dollars going to public or Catholic or private use.
Well, beyond expanding private school choice, charter schools, and special needs, we did a little thing in Wisconsin under the leadership of Scott Walker, and that was called collective bargaining reform. Maybe y'all remember that? And I would say that, you think collective bargaining reform, what does that have to do with schools? But it was a huge,
a lot.
Well, many people did say that to us. It was a huge burden that was taken off of our local school districts to be able to now suddenly decide how best to use their education dollars. And, when you talk about what are the things that we can do as legislators, both at the federal and the state level, let the local school districts decide how they want to spend their money, how best to spend that money, and again, always give parents choices and options. So to me, that is something that's very, very cutting edge, and if you haven't done it in your state, call us. We'll tell you how to do it.
Senator, let me make a note real quick here. Dear federal government, please get the heck out of the way.
Exactly.
Did I hear that right?
That was my message to you, Senator.
Yes. Love all of us. Got it. Okay, I'm sorry. I wanted to make sure I took that note down before we went on, because we are slow in Washington. Everybody says amen?
Amen.
I agree with y'all. Representative, you were getting ready to say something.
I was just going to say, Tim, you were asking before, some of the line of question you might, it's what can Washington do or not do? And I think that while ESSA may be a start of devolving control back to the state, certainly, I think if, we're looking for block grant funds. If you can't block grant, certainly unbundle. We need to be able to piggyback Title I and Title funds onto kids as we see it, not as the districts. Yes. One of the things, as Leah was talking, when I remember my first time I hit the gavel as chairing the K-12 at Probst in Michigan was, I said, we're going to be about funding kids, not districts. And we're not going to be funding inputs, we're going to fund results. And this is something that I think that we need to continue with, but we need to have every bit of freedom to tack on, piggyback those federal funds. I think that kids all ought to start out with the same amount of funding, and you kind of add back to whatever kinds of things, whether it's special needs or poverty or different kinds of things, to be able to add that too. But let us control how that's done, not Washington.
Hearty amen. It's amazing that Washington provides somewhere between 15 and 17% of the revenue or funds for schools, but we want to have about 90% of the control. Yeah. It's pretty ridiculous. Yeah. Please tell your representatives I said that, please. Congress members and senators. Very ridiculous. Two more questions. I think we're getting ready to get towards the end of the panel discussion. 5 minutes left. Number one, sometimes we have to go back to the future. Great movie, but from an education perspective, when I was in high school, way before you two, there was something called SHOP, vocational education, dual track. Today, a high school student who does not graduate earns around $19,000 a year when that child becomes about a 25-year-old. So you spend 4 years in school, 3 years in school, or 2 years in school, or a year in school. You don't finish high school, your annual income at 25 is $19,000 a year. We're going to have 3 million vacancies in skilled labor. I think there's dignity in all work. Dignity in all work. I do not believe that a skilled job is a lesser track, a less valuable option for anyone, whether you finish high school or not. You can go to, in parts of Texas, I hear, you can earn $125,000 a year as a welder. Part of the focus, I think, if we're going to help all of our kids reach their full potential, has to have a component around shop, vocational education, or something like that.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Wisconsin has been a leader in that, and I've been very proud to work on several programs related to that because we have a huge manufacturing base in Wisconsin, and many of our manufacturers are saying, our people are getting close to retirement, and we need to find a way to bridge that skills gap. And so definitely there's some innovative things that can be done in that regard. And I think one of the other things, oftentimes, and I understand the pressure that parents put on kids, and I understand the pressure that guidance counselors in high schools have to be able to say, 75% of our kids went to an Ivy League school. We're doing our children a huge disservice by making them think that they should all go to four-year colleges and just to push them away from opportunities and apprenticeships and very good skilled labor jobs. So the more that we can expose our students to that, and sometimes it just means as community members, we have to put a little bit more pressure on our school districts. As business leaders, go into the schools, say, I have this great opportunity for jobs. Let these children see what can be done. But there's certainly legislative options that can be done to bring a partnership between your skilled labor groups in your state and the education, and get these kids on a track where they will succeed instead of setting them up for failure by sending them to a four-year school that they're not going to be able to get through.
Last question, and let me just say before I ask this question, thank you so much, Senator, I want to get it right, Vukmir. I was going to call her Senator Leah to make it easy on myself. Senator Vukmir and Representative Kelly for your participation in this panel, lively conversation, truly appreciate it. How do we as conservatives win the marketing opportunity that is before us on the issue of school choice? Every parent that gets involved seems to enjoy it. 94% approval rating in DC. When you look at the numbers of the percentages of parents who are involved in the school choice movement, high 80s, low 90s consistently. We're still having to fight uphill to continue this battle and win it. If you have one marketing idea, just one marketing idea, what would it be?
Put a face on the program. Make a story. We oftentimes, as conservatives, talk a lot about facts and figures, and we don't tell stories. And I think that one of the most powerful things that happened in Wisconsin when we moved to lift the cap on our Milwaukee Parental Choice program was to bring the children to the Capitol, and they told the story. And to have the parents of these children tell the story of what they were trying to flee from, and how the schools were failing their kids. We all want our kids to succeed, and to see those parents with tears in their eyes asking us to give their kids a choice. That's how you win over the hearts and minds of people, and ultimately we did that in Wisconsin. Tell a story, put a face on it.
That's great.
I would agree. I would also go, say that I think that we need to get into African American churches, and it has to come from the pulpit. You have to break this bond. I would call it bondage between the Democrat Party and many in the African American community. You really have to break, because it's the teachers' unions, the Democrats, it's this cabal that I can guarantee. There's a lot of kids in bad schools, but if you're black, I can guarantee you're likely in a bad school. And it's unnecessary. I think it's unconscionable, and it's something that's the way I think that we have to attack it. And it's about providing that choice. Once people see it, look what's happened in D.C. Look what's happened in Milwaukee. Look, I mean, it's you provide an avenue, they will bolt.
That's a good point.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much, Andrew. Over there. Thanks. Great job. Excellent.
Thanks, Tim.
Knock it out. All right. All right, they've given me about 45 minutes. I'm lying. I said, y'all walking through the door already. Let me just, almost, you got it right, yes. We're getting ready to have another panel, but between them, your entertainment between the panels. School choice, powerful opportunity, education. I think Senator Vukmir said it really well. Put a face on it. And when I think about the reality of my life and where I stand today, there's only one reason why I stand before you today: quality education. Because all the kids that we're talking about and the reality of putting a face on it, I was one of those kids. I grew up in a single-parent household, mired in poverty, drifted from 7 to 14. How many of y'all know that all drifting's in the wrong direction? Yes. As a freshman in high school, I flunked out. I failed world geography. I may be the first United States senator to ever fail civics. Doubtful, he says. But then I did go to the U.S. Senate. I realized very quickly I have a lot of company. I'm going to leave it there. I'll leave it there. I also failed Spanish and English. When you fail Spanish and English, no one calls you bilingual. No one. They all call you biignorant because you can't speak in any language. That's where I found my unhappy self. But I had two amazing blessings. One was a powerful mother. How many of y'all thank God for your mamas? I thank God for my mama. Now, my mother is a good old-fashioned Southern woman, and she believes that sometimes you have to love your child in a tangible way. That's called a switch. And when I flunked out of high school, my mother, she loved me a lot. Now, those of you who are not from the South, a switch is a Southern apparatus of encouragement. Applied from your belt to your ankles. And she encouraged me a lot. The second amazing blessing I received was meeting a mentor, a guy named John Moniz, who taught me that you could think your way out of poverty. That in America, it doesn't matter where you start. It's what you're willing to do from there. And he started teaching me to take responsibility for my life. And he taught me that education would be a strong foundation on which to stand. And when the senator made her comment about put a face on it, mine is not necessarily the most attractive face to put on it. I understand that already. But I will tell you that in America, education is the closest thing to magic we have for kids stuck in the wrong zip codes, losing hope by the day. I believe, as my mentor taught me, a conservative Republican who I did not know was a conservative Republican. He taught me love, dignity in work, and the power of education. If we remember what the Representative Kelly said and Senator Vukmir said, and go out there and raise up an army of believers who are willing to champion the cause for kids in their neighborhoods, our country will never be the same. We'll be right back with you at the new panel in about 5 minutes.
Thank you so much,
Yes,
Senator.
yes.
Okay, so we're going to do a quick switch to our next panel. While we give him a minute, I'm going to ask my panelists to come up, and I'm going to introduce them as they're coming up. Senator, again, I can't thank you enough, and I know that that last question in particular about marketing is something really critical to all of us as we're thinking about, we know this, many of us know what we're hearing, how do we get that across? And I think what you're going to find out right now from this panel, some
right.
really high living,
Hold on,
breathing
okay.
examples of
Very
where
far.
we've succeeded. There's nothing like it. So I'm going to first start
use it real
in the
quick?
middle with Jackie
I'm
Sissel,
speaking.
Director of Community Engagement in Indiana for years, for over 20 years, and an advocate for poor and minority children. I met Jackie before education reform was cool, and she was working in the state of Indiana to help bring around options and traveling around the country to teach other people how to be great advocates. And she worked prior for Governor Pence in advocating, and now for Charter Schools USA, one of the largest charter school management organizations in the country. So thank you, Jackie. To her left, I have Carol D'Amico. Carol is a nationally recognized author, expert in workforce development, higher education, devotee extraordinaire. She's currently USA Fund's Executive Vice President. I want to thank Carol because she's one of the organizations who made tonight possible, so thank you so much. And to USA Funds for your sponsorship. And to all of our funders out there, we couldn't do it without philanthropy. She's a National Engagement Director for Philanthropy, and in fact, Carol has been in Indiana and the U.S. Department of Education, has held too many titles to even keep straight, but she's truly the go-to person on workforce development and higher education issues, and opportunity has to span from pre-K to higher education. We've got to be blurring the lines of distinction, no more fixing it just on a particular grade level. And I'm leaving Bob Woodson to the last because Bob has a particular story. He goes way back with the Kemps, and he's one of the first people who actually taught me how to speak to real people in Washington, D.C. When we were first working in 1996 with Senator Dan Coates and Joe Lieberman to try to bring about school choice, a program that was later vetoed twice by President Bill Clinton. I called Bob Woodson. I said, Bob, you've succeeded where nobody else has in getting minority leaders, African-American communities engaged in public housing and getting them to take back their housing. He walked around Jack Kemp all around Washington, D.C. He taught people the power of power. Surely you've got to be able to help me figure out how to get minority activists engaged in school choice. He said, come to my office. He put a group of about 15 African-American mothers and fathers in a room, and he said, go ahead, talk to them. And I started talking to them. I started talking to them like a policy wonk. And they're just staring at me. And he just looked at me and said, slow down. Tell them what you want. They're going to be on your side, right? And this one woman looked at me and she said, we may not come from where you come from, but we are going where you're going. You just tell us what you need us to do. And it was so powerful for me to realize that it didn't matter what you look like to talk to minority parents and community leaders. If you have a trusted person and they trust you, they will follow you because they know that you're about their power, right, Jackie? So that's what's so exciting about being here. That's what's so exciting about Senator Scott's story. And so if I can bring you back up, that would be great. I'd love you to engage us in a conversation about how these folks are getting it done and where we go next. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Why don't we start with Carol? Let's talk for a few minutes about the connection between education and poverty and how important it is for us to break. If you break one, you can really, if you have one, you can solve the other. The chasm between the haves and the have-nots in our society is growing, it seems, daily. And there seems to be two important components to stopping or closing that gap. One is family formation, which is difficult for us to solve perhaps from a policy standpoint. The other is education. Would you like to share for a few minutes about your perspective?
Sure, thank you, and thank you all for being here. It's been a while since I've dealt with ALEC, but I'm a huge fan, and I don't know if some of you were around back, boy, this is gonna date me, early 90s, I'd say. ALEC, they were my hero. They produced the first ever report card on how public education was doing across the states, and it changed everything. And I remember I used to have that report card on my wall, and this was before web and Googling, and so I'm a big fan of ALEC, and it's just my honor to be reintroduced to you all in this forum. Thank you, Jeannie, for bringing me back together. Jeannie and I go way back. In fact, in a day where there were not too many conservatives in education reform, and there were not very many women conservatives. And this is 1990, late 80s, 1990. When I got invitations to speak, they would call and they say, well, we need a conservative woman on the panel. And I would say, is the other one busy? And that was Jeannie. So we've come a long way. So thank you all. I had to get that out, Senator Scott. Here at USA Funds, we're headquartered here. We're a nonprofit. We've been around for 60 years, and our mission has been to help low-income students have access to higher education. Today, our philanthropy, a lot of it is focused on what we call this disengaged young adults. You have them in your states. There's 6 million young adults in the U.S. between 16 and 24 who are neither in education nor employed. Nothing good could come from how those young people are spending their time. So the connection is really clear for us, and we invest in programs in your communities across the country that really put those students back on a path. And one of the core components of putting them back on a path is what you said, Senator Scott, is work and the connection between work and education. So if there's one thing that I can ask you to do, because I don't know if I'm going to get to talk anymore tonight, if there's one thing that I can ask you to do is in your states, are you allowing communities to blur those lines between education and work so that we can re-engage these young people? We've got to break these silos. And these young people, when they experience the dignity of work and the self-esteem that brings to them, it changes everything. Work changes everything. And then we get them back into education. So that's my spiel, and if I don't say anything else tonight, I got that out.
Well, how about that? With a PhD in education leadership, I'm going to make sure that you say a whole lot more than that for the rest of this evening. Jackie spent 20 years as an advocate and one of the strongest proponents for vouchers in our country, and thank you for your engagement. You are a rare person in the country, unfortunately. We look forward to seeing more of you come to Washington and hang out with us. Talk to me about breaking that chain as well.
Oh, goodness. Well, I too want to thank everyone for being here, for Jeannie and for Jack having, Jimmy, for Jack. I knew Jack Kemp and had an opportunity to meet him. So it's my honor to be here. Boy, I started off being an advocate when I walked into my son's public school and saw him sitting by the wall with a cardboard box around him. And they had isolated my son over in the corner. And I asked the teacher what was that all about and why wasn't she working with him at maybe during recess. And she says, that's my coffee break time. I don't have time to, I'm not gonna waste my coffee break time on students. I need my coffee break time. And I'm like, wow, you know, this is my flesh and blood. I mean, I appreciate your coffee break, but this is my child. So then that led me to having other conversations with other parents who were frankly intimidated to go into the schools and advocate on behalf of their kids. They felt like they were failures in school. They felt like they did not have the wherewithal to speak to an educator about the plight of their child. So then we began to put together some parents working with organizations. I'm thinking of Zakia Courtney from Milwaukee, who did great work organizing parents there, and started trying to have conversations which led then to us testifying in the Indiana Assembly about vouchers when the voucher program started under the tremendous leadership of Governor Mitch Daniels, who is just my hero forever. He risk his political future to start a very vibrant educational conversation in Indiana. And then Tony Bennett, I had the great fortune of working under Tony Bennett. Believe me, he doesn't have horns. He's a great man. He's been maligned in this country, some of the things he's done, the risk he took on behalf of poor and minority children. And he took a stab at turnaround schools, which were schools that were failing for 6 years or more. And he did that work on behalf of poor and minority children. So that whole journey, I'm really condensing things. It could be much longer. But those conversations, those actions got me involved in advocating for poor and minority children.
Bob? Well, let me give you a little back. My interest in education peaked when I was active in the civil rights movement and leading demonstrations in Westchester, Pennsylvania, near my hometown. And the goal of our movement, I split with the civil rights leadership on the whole issue of forced busing for education. I was always opposed to forced busing. I said the opposite of segregation is not integration, it is desegregation. And we should be pursuing excellence. And so I remember having this debate at the New York Bar Association with Julius Chambers, who was a PhD lawyer from Harvard, black, debating me on the old issue of forced busing for integration. And I said to him 80% through the debate, I said, Julius, if we have two circumstances, situation A, where it's all black, but there's a presence of educational excellence, and situation B, where there is diminished excellence, but it's integrated, where should we send our children? He said to B. I said, this debate is over. Because it is important to understand that up until 1960s, there was never an association between race and poverty and aberrant self-destructive behavior. In the 10 years during the Depression, between 1930 and 1940, when we had a negative GNP, 25% unemployment rate, 40% in the black community, the marriage rate among those poor, segregated blacks was higher than it was in the white community. Elderly people could walk safely in their community without fear of being mugged. It was not until the 1960s, and we could spend the whole day talking about what happened then, did you see this association between race, income, and aberrant behavior. And so, so what I really think we need to do, as I said, I split with the civil rights movement, and I was very active in Milwaukee in pursuing choice. And you were saying conservatives, the reason we won that is because when Clint Bolick was arguing in Madison, Wisconsin for choice, we had 50 parents of children in Milwaukee sitting in the gallery shaking their heads when he was arguing. And that is because if we are to bring about and promote reform, we cannot be, parents, low-income parents cannot be acted upon. They must be agents of their own improvement. But we forget that. And so the reason that, and Polly Williams and the parents, it was the parents that helped win that fight, fighting for their own. That was the face of school choice. But what I also said, and this is important too, to the Bradley Foundation, who's been supporting us since their existence, I said to Mike Grebe and the others, it's important for those of us who advocate for choice not to appear to be hostile to public education. Right. Therefore, what we were able to do is we need to make public schools safer, because you cannot talk about education reform, whether it's private or public, if the environment in which the schools are operating are hostile, if there's civic unrest, if there's violence, if there's gang activity. So what we do at the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, we have started a program called Violence Free Zone, where we've gone into Milwaukee schools by hiring young adults from the community that are moral mentors and character coaches to the kids. And they resolve conflicts result in the school environment becoming safer for children. So therefore, once you begin to attack that external community where there is civil unrest, then you can really promote real reform, whether it's private or public. Another point, All public funds are not bad, and all private are not virtuous. I can give you an example of the Annie Casey Foundation, the Robert Gates Foundation, pouring millions of dollars into education reform that are parachuted into these communities with great fanfare. All local community foundations are pouring money in, glad to be shoulder to shoulder with these giants, only to have the program worse than they were when the school started. A private effort. So we really need to discuss what are solutions, and that's what I hope that we can talk more about. What are solutions to the problem?
Let's go back to Jack and talk about, Carol, the conversation around the blurred lines between education and our workforce or the workforce development, apprenticeship programs and other initiatives. I noted in your biography that you've spent some time on adult education. Would you talk with us a little bit about how to effectively blur those lines? Because obviously, Representative Kelly, who has a background in business, talked specifically about workforce development and the important role that education plays in that. And obviously, if you look at our adult population, the age group that you were talking about, without that high quality education, it can be devastating.
Well, one way to blur the lines is look at all the funding in your communities that go to help this population. And part of it is caused by Washington, Senator Scott, with these siloed funding.
We apologize again.
Okay, well, just fix it, okay?
Yes,
okay.
ma'am. We'll shrink it and block grant it,
okay.
And that'll be a big fix.
All right, just go ahead, just do it. So that's part of the problem, but it can be done. If you look at all the money that's available and don't look that it belongs to the public school system or this belongs to this system and that system. It belongs to serve the population. We force these 16-year-olds, they have dropped out of school. It did not suit their needs. And to keep putting them back in that environment does not work. Send the money to an employer, and they go to the employer 3 days a week, and maybe they do some classroom work, and maybe they do some online work. We need to find solutions that are not system-based and based on the funding. That takes courage, that takes vision, that takes imagination, and it takes, somebody butting up against some of these rules and regulations. It can be done. Governors need some shoring up sometime. That's where legislators come in. But it can be done. It is being done. But I think that's the next frontier.
Yeah, I really think that we need to be looking elsewhere for a source of innovation. I think we need to look among the people suffering the problem. If we say that 70% of households are raising children that are dropping out of school or in jail and drugged, that means 30% are not. Why don't we go into 30% of the households and inquire among people who are living in poverty but not of poverty to find out how are they achieving against the odds when everyone around them is failing? We don't listen to people who have survived in that environment. A case in point, we have two young ladies who their whole 3 years in high school lived in a homeless shelter or sleeping in their mother's car. They would study by their cell phone, and one of them graduated valedictorian and the sister salutatorian and started college as a sophomore. And they're in Spelman. And there are at least 20 other young people that fit that same description. They're news for one day. Why don't we assemble those 20 kids into a room and put a microphone in front of them and also bring these single parents in who made that possible and find out what is it that they did? What was the magic sauce? And what can we do as policymakers to formulate policies based upon what they say, not people who are educated in the field?
Can I piggyback on that? I think that is so true. I mean, about 10 years ago, I asked that question of a young man who was an African-American engineer. And I grew up in Southside Chicago. And I said, you and some of your buddies were going down a path. At one point, you went down this path that allowed you to achieve this. Somebody else went down a very wrong path. What was the difference? And this has an effect on me. It affects our philanthropy at USA Funds. He said, well, that's easy. The ships. And I said, ships? Did you work on a ship? And he said, no, the ships. Internship, mentorship, and scholarship. I wouldn't be where I am today without those three things. And it started in middle school, and it followed me through high school and through college. And that's what you're saying is we know it can work. There are examples of this, yet we don't take those to any kind of scale.
Jackie?
My former boss, Governor Mike Pence, started a vocational program in prisons where we have high numbers of African Americans incarcerated. And I think that we should start with that captive audience right there and start some vocational training right in our prisons where these men and women are going to come back out on our streets unequipped to even make it in this life. And I know that there are some clergy right here in Indianapolis that are working on these issues. I spoke to one just yesterday that is trying to do work with even ex-felons, trying to help them. And a lot of times those people are coming out of prison, they're unable to read, they suffered a substandard education while they were in school. They ended up in prison. Some of them, I mean, they did something wrong. That's why they're in prison. But they can't live a life sentence. They need to be able to come out and get gainful employment. And I think we have a captive audience in these prisons of trying to train these people to come out and have a viable life.
I know that there are a number of organizations around the country that have been very successful and very effective at making that transition happen. One in South Carolina is called Proverbs 226, that spends a lot of time in prisons educating young men specifically for their re-entry into society, and the recidivism rate is around 8%. So powerful tool that's making an incredible difference. When you think about you're a parent, I can't imagine as you walked into the classroom and saw your child in a cardboard box that you thought quality education, cardboard box, quality experience. As a parent, tell me the role as we look for solutions of parental involvement in education. Sounds so simple.
No, it's not. It's not simple at all.
Talk about that a little bit.
A lot of parents that are impoverished are living paycheck to paycheck. A lot of them, all it takes to derail their whole life is a blown tire, an engine that goes out in the car, a bill, an unexpected bill, a payday loan can completely derail their economy. And so while they're out trying to provide for their families, a lot of times they can't get off work to get to the parent-teacher conference, which is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So they're on a vicious cycle of trying to fight poverty. Bob has done this better than anybody in the country. He knows these issues better than anyone. And the constant fight that impoverished parents have in trying to advocate for their families, it's very difficult. You just have to bring them in, and you have to have them at the table and make it convenient for them. If it's Saturday morning, then we got to do it Saturday morning. Yeah. We can't do it at school time. You have to do it after hours to accommodate these families.
We are down to our last 5 minutes. I'm going to start with Carol. I know, I was surprised too. And then we'll work our way back to you, Bob. If you were creating an educational toolbox, what would be the one tool that you would not leave out no matter what?
Educational toolbox. Well, since we're hosted by Jeannie, I would have to say choice. But we have to have quality choices. And that's where the deregulation comes along. Why does it have to be school as we envision it? Why can't education happen in lots of different places? And the money follows the child, whether that's to a work experience at McDonald's or whether that's in a classroom. The money follows the child for education, not school.
Well, because of your amazing standard there, because you just set a new high bar, they provided us with an additional 5 minutes. Praise the Lord. Never seen that happen on stage before, so.
Jackie?
Toolbox. I just can't finish my comments here today without mentioning the Black Alliance for Educational Options and Dr. Howard Fuller, who is my mentor when it comes to talking about education choice and fighting for poor and minority children. And so just that fight continues, and a toolbox, it has to be viable choices. Both of my kids, here I'm an advocate for education choice, and both of my sons dropped out of school. One dropped out in the 10th grade, one dropped out in the 11th grade of high school. And so I'm tripping, okay, that my sons are dropped out of school. Thank God for Governor Mitch Daniels, who came up with the Hoosier Youth Challenge Academy. My son was almost 3 strikes you're out. He was going to jail. A caseworker helped him go into the Hoosier Youth Challenge Academy. Thank God for Mitch Daniels, who started that program here in Indiana. He went to live with the National Guard, and they had PT. There was no laying in bed. They had to get up, do physical training, all this stuff. He graduated from there, then went on to funeral director school. He's now embalming. So those are the choices, viable choices that we need. Maybe not college, but that really helped him.
Absolutely.
And then my son went to the day adult high school through public schools and got his degree. So it's got to be choices that really work for families.
Awesome. Bob.
I really think I want to thank the Eline Foundation in Milwaukee, as well as the Bradley Foundation that has supported our violence-free zone for the last 11 years. We were able to recruit neighborhood young adults who are from the same environment, who have met and overcame those same challenges. We have about 70 of them in 11 public schools acting as moral mentors and character coaches to the kids. And we may do 20 interventions, so the kids, it's like having your big brother to get your back. As a consequence, we're able to reduce violence by 25% in just 3 months in any school, and this was documented by the Baylor Institute of University. And we're also moved to Racine and in South Dallas. And what happens is that these moms who are struggling there need help. And having young adult males as surrogate fathers and in there, one male can be a surrogate father to 10 young men. And finally, what these young men have said to us is that the kids behave themselves, because we're also coaches. Coaches are a powerful influence. They said that when they're with us, they behave themselves, but not when they're at home. So then the coaches got together and said that every Friday, the kids have to get a behavioral card signed by the teacher and the parents, so they can't practice. And so the parents said, this is the only control that I have over my young son, is that he can't practice. One other innovation, one of our youth advisors, again, said, how do we get the parents engaged in South Division High School? They're not coming. So what they did, they got themselves certified as IRS tax preparers, and then went out and helped the parents, because most Black and Hispanic low income are non-filers.
Right.
So the first year, they returned $630,000 on behalf of these parents. The second year, $1.2 million. Wow. It's because they're eligible for returns, but they don't file. But they also know they're unbanked, so they made an arrangement with the banks to be on hand, so a requirement of them getting their tax returns, they had to have the money, they had to open a bank account. All of this didn't come from some well-educated expert. It came from the people in the community who know firsthand, and so we just are not equipped to even look to this level for innovation ways, so we don't have any problems with parents showing up at teachers' meetings, because the youth advisors have earned the trust and confidence of the parents by appealing to them in concrete and very specific ways. So you want to know how the conservative movement can win over the American public, demonstrate that conservative principles have the consequence of improving the quality of life for people.
If I can say one thing. I appreciate you, Bob. But I wanted to say, too, we have coined a phrase of reform fatigue in America, where we're just tired of hearing about reform. We're tired of hearing about choice. We're tired. We cannot afford the luxury of reform fatigue. We still have children that are out here in these schools struggling to graduate, struggling to make it, struggling to make life in America. Dr. Fuller called us one time. He sent out an email about a month ago. He said, stay woke. That's all he said, stay woke. We got to stay woke. We got to keep our hand on the wheel. We got to stay busy. We got to stay engaged on this whole debate about education reform.
Absolutely. I think we're down to our last 2 or 3 minutes. Final question from my perspective. Upward mobility, achieving the American dream, power of education, eradicating poverty. The floor is yours, Carol.
Oh, wow. Go ahead, Jackie. I got to think about that for a minute.
Say it again, Doc.
Upward mobility, the ability to achieve the American dream. If there's something that seems to be evaporating in too many houses, in too many places around the country, is that one's kids will be able to achieve the American dream the way the parents achieve the American dream.
I think what's evaporating is hope. I think we have an evaporation of hope right now, and I hate to bring it up, but when you see black men being killed in the streets, that has been the debate with my sons. You know, my son got off work the other night. He doesn't have a car. He was walking home through a neighborhood. The police showed up, shined the light on him. He laid on the ground with both hands up saying, I don't have a gun. I'm just getting off work. And the officer, of course, came over and said, sir, you don't have to do that. Helped him off the ground and told him he was all right. But this fear, this hopelessness is pervasive right now. So whatever we can do to instill hope back into our communities, it's to me, it's important.
I cannot allow it to end on that one because I know this is a little controversial, but
It is.
Tim talks about him being about police. I've had a 29-year-old brother shot to death and killed on the streets, leaving 5 children. I had a 17-year-old niece who was raped and killed on the streets of Philadelphia. I've also had a 23-year-old nephew who was shot to death and murdered. 2 other nephews put in intensive care unit. They were not done by white police officers.
Absolutely.
They were done by people who looked like them.
Absolutely.
And we had 2,000 blacks killed in Chicago by other blacks and 9 by police officers. So our problem, it seems to me, is not police.
No.
It is internal.
And let me clear that up.
And so, I know that, but
Yeah.
we always seem to end it on talking about law enforcement. And I think we need to set the record straight.
And I wasn't talking about law enforcement.
I am one who believes that we're
hope.
overplaying it. The whole race piece is destroying this country.
I talked about hopelessness is what I was talking
Well,
about.
Jack, I think you make a good point, and I know Bob has been passionate about this and sometimes critical of others who have the opportunity and take the floor to speak out on something that is very personal. And frankly, if we're going to have an opportunity to bring this American family together, we're going to have difficult conversations. Anyone who understands the gun violence in the nation and wants to point the finger towards law enforcement, they're pointing in the wrong direction.
And
The
I
fact
didn't say only law,
exactly.
I said hopelessness.
The fact of the matter is that when you look at the gun violence in America, 30,000 people die at the hands of a gun. About 65% of it is suicide. And when you look at, which is a startling number, by the way, there's no doubt that if you look at the homicide rate in America, 91% of folks who kill African Americans are African Americans.
Absolutely.
By the way, the vast majority of folks who kill white folks are white folks. Asians are Asian folks. So there's just no question about it. We seem to have an affinity for having passionate conversations that devolve with folks who look like you. The question of authority is a very different question. And what I think you were presenting, Jackie, was a conversation about hopelessness and the role of authority in neighborhoods. So I think it's a very different, you can't conflate the two conversations together and walk away having had a good conversation.
Exactly.
However, since this is not, I'm happy to have a crime and punishment conversation with anyone any day on these stages. It would be great for us to do that without any question. But Carol, we can't forget Carol. Carol, you close us out.
You know, you heard my spiel about work. I mean, people who work aren't going around shooting each other. They're busy. So, you know, we have got to get our communities and get them focused on getting these young people engaged in work. And I would say work over school. I mean, work brings the self-esteem, true self-esteem. And then you get them engaged in education. You build a path for them. But they've achieved something. So that's how I would like to end it.
I'll close with this. If you look at those folks who are incarcerated and ask what they have in common, having visited prisons and sat around and spoken to the folks who are incarcerated, 3 things seem to be synonymous with ending up in the wrong place. Poverty, single-parent households, and being functionally illiterate.
Yes. Yes.
These folks have some of the solutions. God bless. Thank you, sir. Jackie?
Love you.
Thank you very much.
I wasn't mean, so I was on the merit board for 6 years. I love you.
Well, on behalf of the Jack Kemp Foundation and the Center for Education Reform and Opportunity Lives, we want to thank you. We certainly appreciate ALEC, and again, you all are on the field. And being on the field of battle is never easy, but we appreciate you. We certainly appreciate Tim Scott and all the folks who participated. If you want to learn more about these organizations, obviously we encourage you to go to Center for Education Reform, and we want you all to go into your communities, find teachers who are the standard bearers, who understand what it takes to be courageous in the classroom, and who care about kids and are willing to be mentors to them when oftentimes they don't have parents. But highlight the folks who are doing it good. When Bob Woodson was talking about the 30% who are doing it right, go find those people in your communities, talk to them, and if we can ever be helpful, please let us know. We'd love to encourage you and tout the good work that you're doing. And Jeannie, you can share the video on the web from the Center for Education Reform website. And the bars are open. Thank you all very much. Have a great night and a great rest of the week.